Hi, I'm John Cohn, and welcome to the Boardroom. No, this isn't where we go to talk about different types of wood grain. This is where we talk about board games. And today, I'm coming to you from my office for a very special episode. That's right, we're going to be interviewing an author, a game designer, and also my evil twin, Andrew Najberg. You might know him from his books like Golitalk, The Mobius Door, and Extinction Dream. But he and I have co-designed a board game called The Bad Side of Town, coming soon to Kickstarter from Beyond Killer Games. Now, in this game, you are playing as a serial killer. You have made an alliance with several other serial killers in your town that you all can operate peacefully with each other, doing what you do best. But in order to do it, you have a couple of rules that you have to follow. You have to clean up after yourselves, and you have to stick to your own turf. Now, in this game, a new serial killer has come to town and he is ignoring all the rules. He is leaving bodies everywhere and it's threatening your good time. So, in this fully cooperative board game, you have to work together with your fellow serial killer players to try to clean up bodies by getting rid of visibility from the bodies that are there. You're trying to clean up three types of evidence, which are blood, fingerprints, and fiber evidence, and you're trying to collect the bodies themselves and take them to your safe house so that A, the police don't find them, and B, so that you can actually solve the crime yourself and figure out who's doing this and put a stop to them. So, with that, let's jump straight into our interview. Hey, Andrew, thanks so much for coming on to the boardroom. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing pretty good. It's actually like a pretty spectacular day outside, which means that I'm spending the whole day inside working at my computer, thinking, man, it's nice out there.
That's like how I always get my good weather. It's like, oh, it's a lovely day. Anyways, so since it's such a lovely day outside, it's a great day to sit around indoors and talk about board games.
Absolutely. Isn't that what board games are for? To keep you from the outside world.
Absolutely. So you have a game that is coming out. We worked on it together, called The Bad Side of Town. And first thing I wanted to ask you is, what is your board gaming origin story? What did you grow up playing?
Oh, goodness. My sister and I moved around a lot growing up. More technically, my parents moved us. It was never really voluntary, but as a result, we always had large stretches wherever we lived where we didn't have a whole lot of local friends. And so that really led us to playing a lot of board games. And we actually had some, I think, fairly unique access to board games growing up. My parents did have, your standard American drivel. So we had Monopoly and we had, Parcheesi and Sorry and, all of those standard dice rollers, the epitome of which I think is Trouble, where you just push a button and it's, yeah. And so we did have those. But at the same time, when me and Tiffany got a little older, we actually discovered in the back of our upstairs closets that my dad had all of these other games. And one of them, actually, which was probably the one we played the most, was this big Lord of the Rings board game with Ralph Bakshi art on the cover from the same cover as the movie. And it was this huge tabletop game with a hexagon, a hex space map that covered all of the main action of Middle Earth. It had hundreds of tiles to represent various different armies and figures. And of course, it also had character titles, cards, an instruction manual like this thick. And in truth, we never actually figured out how to play the game the way it was supposed to be played, but instead we just invented our own rules for it. And they were pretty cohesive, and it actually was an absolute blast. Our games would last for weeks at a time. Then we branched out into sort of what I think of as the big three of American strategic gaming, which is we had Axis and Allies, Shogun, and Fortress America. All three of which were, pretty decent strategy based, sort of conquest games. They had their own unique mechanics. And, Very similarly, I mean, sometimes we would abandon some of the basic mechanics and make our own versions, because we sometimes decided we just liked the way it played other ways more. But then I took a long break after that because my sister went off to college, and like really even actually myself through college, I barely touched board gaming. I had a couple of friends who were into things like D&D, and so I did a bit of that. Actually, really, it was more Vampire the Masquerade. But so I did a little bit of role playing stuff. But then when late in my undergraduate days, I ended up making a friend with another creative writer named Michael Allen, and he introduced me to his roommates at the time, and we all kind of became a group of friends. And they were all really interested in board gaming, and they actually got more and more interested as we got out of college and we started using board games as an excuse to get together a couple times a year. And Michael was definitely the type, he was really into games, and so he would buy all kinds of imported board games. And the first one he introduced me to, just when me and my wife went over there to hang out with his family, he introduced me to Carcassonne, which I immediately fell in love with. I could think it's an absolutely incredible game. I love the total simplicity of, you have no setup. All you need is a box of tiles and you just start playing. And I really loved that. And I loved the thought behind it. I loved that it's kind of competitive, but it's also weirdly cooperative. You end up like kind of sometimes sacrificing points for yourself for the aesthetics of the map. Which I thought was really interesting. It was a game that actually made you sort of rethink the way that gaming would normally work. And then at one of our gaming sessions, and this is sort of the last thing I'll mention, I got introduced to the game Pandemic, which immediately became like my favorite game of all time because it was the first time I'd ever played a fully cooperative game. And what I loved about it was, and we used to, have a few beers during these events, is that we literally were up to like 5 in the morning playing round after round of the game, having a few drinks and just talking over the table, like, trying to speculate multiple moves in advance, almost like we were chess players, except that like, all of the play the chat that everyone was on the same team. And I really loved that about it, because, it created a sense of community. And, I like board games because, aside from being just sort of an interesting way to interact, they have that focus on interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think that for me, you try to think about like what is the thing that brings you to the table, right? Is it an excuse to socialize with friends? Is it a chance to stretch your brain a little bit with puzzle solving? Is it about being better, more skilled, more strategic than your friends, and you kind of put all of those into one together in your answer, which I think it just shows all the different ways and exemplifies all the best ways that board games can get us excited, get us wanting to get back to the table and try something new or try the same game over again. So I think you touched on this a little bit already just at the end there, but I kind of wanted to steer a little bit specifically into the bad side of town and what your inspirations were. And I think we could probably guess at this point, but if you could talk a little bit more about, what is the game, what not just in terms of board games, storylines, what was your inspiration to make the bad side of town?
So, as a whole, I actually like to pitch the bad side of town as Dexter meets Pandemic. I do like. I've always liked serial killer stuff, the tension and sort of the board escalation of Pandemic. I like the idea of playing against the game, and a game that creates interesting enough stakes that narratively you want to win. You don't want the world to be wiped out by the deadly diseases. You don't want the serial killer to take over the city. Maybe you just want your killings to take over the city, but that's a whole nother part of the game. So I started thinking about things that my family would be interested in, and I am a horror writer, so I kind of wanted to draw from that as well because I do have something. Some people who actually follow my work, and so I kind of it's like, well, let's make something that they'll enjoy too. And so yeah, I started thinking about just putting a serial killer skin on the game Pandemic. I had the mechanic I wanted. I had the narrative I wanted to fit it into. And the first thing I really started thinking about is, okay, so how do these even fit together? I'd never made a game before, like aside from making up rules to existing games. And as I started thinking, okay, so this is a story about, killers hunting killers. And so I started thinking about, what are the different elements that are going to be part of this? And then how can I turn those narrative elements into the game that I want it to be? And so I started gradually moving away from the pandemic model, introducing new mechanics, experimenting with ideas, sometimes successfully, and then some, tried to put in and struck out. Makes me think of the poor, long lost taxi stands from the original rendition of the game. Stuff like that. Yeah.
The pandemic inspiration is clear when you play the game, but I think what is so great about Bad Side of Town is that it is so mechanically thematic. Every piece of that serial killer life has been sort of translated in its own way, in a way that I think, when we had one playtest, when we were doing these playtests recently, when somebody had said it's simpler to play than Pandemic, and it's more thematic toward what you're doing than Pandemic. And I thought it was really good validation, because that's what we were hoping to do, right? That's what we set out to achieve, was something that's not complicated, but oozes narrative in a mechanical experience. So you kind of mentioned, when you were coming up with your original ideas, you were sort of at first translating ideas from Pandemic. Were there any ideas in your theory craft of coming up with what you, in your mind, were hoping this game were going to become, that when it came to actually game design, rubber meets the road, or in this instance, cube meets the cardboard, that you realized, oh, this is not working at all the way that I intended it to work, or this is not at all giving me that feeling in my head, of what I thought it was going to be? Was there anything that surprised you or challenged you when it came time to actually design the game in earnest?
So I think one of the biggest ones was the way the game would flow. So, in thinking about pandemic, one of the things that had always really struck me about the experience is that from the beginning, you have sort of a steady escalation of the game's challenge. And the game itself has multiple meters that ensure that that's going to occur. So, you got a couple of different sliding counters that help escalate the stakes. And originally, I had investigated, or I had sort of envisioned this sort of steadily increasing urgency. The game has in its final form the panic meter, which is sort of your determinant of whether or not you are going to win or lose. But the panic meter doesn't directly escalate the gameplay. So you don't have this sort of steady slider of difficulty. Instead, we had these really interesting ebbs and flows of tension. Instead of an increase of tension, it's like, it started to feel like everything would explode, and then it would rain back in. And then you wouldn't quite know when it was going to explode again. And the more you play, when you first play it, of course, you have no idea what's going to happen. And, it was fun to watch players sort of witness the chaos, exploding on it. But, I really like that during replay of the game, it actually creates a tension, because every time the board falls quiet and you have a couple of quieter draws, you start to realize that that's only good. The longer it's quiet, the worse the explosion that's going to follow probably is, because then suddenly you get like, two double murders in a row, and suddenly everything is chaos and there's cubes everywhere.
In the game, there are so many different elements. There's so much going on, and like you said, it's very much narratively focused. Of, okay, we've got our visibility we're building up. We've got these ebbs and flows of how the murderer strikes, as we call him in the game, the bad side butcher. But on the other side of it, we have all of these really creative, colorful characters that we're playing as. These are serial killers, but they all have their own personalities and mechanics that tie so closely with them. From the corpse-eating cannibal, over to the fisherman who always wants to stay near the water. Can you talk a little bit about the process of designing these characters, and which one was your favorite to make?
So Process wise, I think a lot of it really just came down to looking at the different mechanics of the game, the different features of the board, and then trying to create unique traits that would interact directly with those features. Trying to come up with new abilities and force them to be more disparate from each other, I think, was definitely a really important part of that process. And if I had to pick a favorite, honestly, I probably am going to go with the cannibal. Largely because of the conversation that occurs over the table because of the cannibal. I wanted the game to have a lot of dark humor, and the cannibal just leads to naturally talking about eating corpses. And like one of my favorite things is to get people to say sentences that they never expected to say. And so he definitely facilitates
I
that.
think for me, the Desanguinator, for similar reasons that you said the cannibal, that the conversations that happen when you're playing as a Desanguinator, people go, I think I'm going to drink some blood. I haven't drank blood in like 2 whole turns. I need to drink some blood before we keep going. Just like refresh my stamina, lower some stress. It is. It's really fun. It's really neat when that happens. Um, so you and I, we're both writers and we're both board game designers. And at least when I started getting into doing both, I found a weird number of similarities between the two that it didn't seem at first like there would be much in common with these two art forms. What's your experience been as far as crossing these two different careers together?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. So I think I think at the core, there's two things that they both have in common that are really central to how I view creative work in general. The first is in terms of how I conceptualize what a creative work is. I think that, and I have, I teach writing as well, and I talk to my students about this all the time because one of the hardest things in teaching writing is to convince beginning students of the importance of having active visual or active sensory images and precise sensory images. A lot of times they just want to tell the strokes of the story, and because that's the interesting part. But at the same time, it's the images that create the experience of the story. And it is for me, the idea of creating an experience is at the center of everything that I do. And that's whether or not actually I'm teaching, whether or not I'm writing, or whether or not I'm trying to design a board game. That's why narrative was so important to me, but also not just narrative, also things like fostering tabletop conversation, trying to think about what's this game going to feel like when a group of friends play it, and then trying to control that through those design elements to create a positive and engaging experience. Because ultimately, I mean, what's the point if we're not like helping our readers, fans, players, whatever you want to use for it. What's the point if we're not making their lives better and helping them create memories? I don't want to make things that we zone out for, where we just, forget that time ever existed. It's a problem I find with more passive forms of entertainment like movies. Don't get me wrong. I love movies. It's one of my favorite ways to deflate. I do love binge watching a TV show a couple times, maybe once a month. So it's not to criticize that as activity because I think we all do need to turn ourselves off sometimes. But at the same time, I don't want that to be my sort of dominant form of experiencing the world. So yeah, games and literature both, I think, are mentally engaging, and they create experiences in the minds of the people who engage in them that are going to last with them as memories. So that's the first major element. Now the second is that I do find their structures to be interestingly similar. I have I do have almost a mathematical way that I view the underlying structure of both books and games. I see them sort of as maybe like elaborate and shifting flowcharts. It's the best way to explain how I sort of envision it. And in a lot of ways, especially like in a board game, for example, the big difference between it and say a traditional narrative is that there's branching possibilities in every traditional narrative. As you're reading it, you're wondering, is the character going to do this, or is this going to happen to them, or is this going to happen to them? So those branches are always there. It's just the written portion only follows one of those tracks. It doesn't pursue the branches away from that central core that you've chosen to show them, that plot. Games in many ways seem like they do also have those similar branching paths. But once the decision is made, unless you want to kind of, oh, what's the word for it? Save scum, and then backtrack to a prior move, you're really also locked on every engagement with the game is a single step experience forward. So the narrative of the game as it unfolds, the experience of the game as it unfolds, actually is experienced in a very similar form to the way we would experience a narrative. So yeah. I think that's the best answer I got for that.
That's a great answer. If you had to give one piece of advice that applies to both board game design and writing and has to fit perfectly with either, what would you encourage people to learn?
I think that both game design and writing are not what we would call natural skills. They're not things that we just intrinsically do. Like, just for example, running. That's a natural skill. It's something that pretty much everybody does. You don't really need anybody to teach you how to do it, at least to an extent. But you of course learn that there are better ways to run. In fact, actually, it's not the worst example, anyways, because running, of course, you learn how to improve your posture so that you run faster. You also learn how to keep your movement rhythm better. You learn how to read your own body better. You learn how to swing your arms in exact ways so that they're carrying your momentum forward. And the only way you learn this is by practice, by steadily doing it through repetition. And I think writing and game design both have that at its core. It's not something that, first off, you can't wait till you have like this rush of inspiration. Sure, you need a concept, you need a starting point. I know so many people who they're like, yeah, I only write when I'm inspired. And it's like, well, how much have you gotten done? Well, I mean, I've never finished a book, and it's because if we always just wait for it to that crazy urgency and excitement, it's never going to happen. The biggest difference between folk who get books published, you get game published, and those who don't is the ones who get stuff done keep doing it. They make themselves do it steadily, one step at a time. And so, one thing that was really interesting to me for this game was, you know, I felt like I had a pretty good concept at the beginning, but it was really cool to see it sort of evolve and refine as we kept at it, as we kept having play sessions, sitting down and having our debriefing afterwards, trying to figure out what we needed to fine tune and tinker with, what experiments we could try, and then from there, though, having this sudden new rush of revision inspiration, that wasn't enough either. You have to play it like 5 times, and you're like, oh wait, this is a variant I didn't expect. Writing's the same way. Rewrite a scene, it doesn't work out. And it's not like we're like, oh, well, this book's dead. You rewrite it and you try it again from a different angle. Sometimes you're pretty happy with it, but sometimes, you're like, maybe we could do this a little bit better. And so you draw it back and then you keep trying it. And the trick is that you're keeping coming back to it again and again and again. And, we've been at this one, for about like 18 months now, I think, since we really started working on it. I mean, that's a serious amount of time.
All right, so I've got one last question for you. And we talked a lot about big games in our lives, big games that I think are pretty well known: Trouble, Yahtzee, Pandemic, even Shogun. Shogun for me was, when you were talking about your Lord of the Rings game, that was my version of that Lord of the Rings game where I was like, I don't really understand the rules. I was like 9 when I wanted to play it. I was like, we'll make up some rules and we'll figure it out. I mostly wanted to play with the plastic swords. What is a game that you haven't mentioned here today yet that maybe people aren't super aware of, maybe is not one of these big popular games that you love? You're basically your favorite game that is not a big mainstream board game.
Okay. So I know it's not exactly, it sort of stretches the definition of what a board game is. But this comes back to those game nights that I mentioned where me and my old college friends get together. And my friend Michael has this game called Pitch Car, which is an absolute blast. You build a racetrack, and it has a number of different configurations that you have enough track pieces to build it into. And there's also like expansions that create like ramps where there's actual like jumps and gaps and stuff like that, and there's places where the track narrows down super thin, and you flick the car, your race car, for your turn. And if you flick it off the track, of course, it sets you back. And we've played it with up to like 8 players at once. And it's an absolute blast as a group game. And it's one that I mean, it is super simple in its execution, but it's like weirdly skill based. So it's not like just like a hollow dice roller where you're just like relying on pure random chance, or God, Candyland, which I don't think even qualifies as a game. But it's a really fun group game. And you can knock each other off the track and stuff like that. So yeah, that's a game I have a tremendously fond association with because again, I'm about the experience of the game. I want that to be the thing that drives it, and that's a game that creates really excellent experiences.
And that sounds like, honestly, I want to get this game now. You said it's called Pitch Car?
Yep.
All right. I think I may have to get it now. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Our game, Bad Side of Town, it's being published by Beyond Killer Games, and it is coming to Kickstarter soon. Um, any last things, anything you want to promote?
I wish I had another game I could tease right now, but I'm still very early in the design process of the next thing I do want to pitch. I do think I've got a couple really cool concepts for games that I've taken notes about over the last couple of years, but no, I think I'll take the easy way out on this one and just say, I do have Extinction Dream, which has been doing really pretty well, and it's been getting great reviews. It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and pretty much anywhere at that point. It's a science fiction horror story about a young man who gets deployed into Earth orbit, thinking he's going to be growing tomatoes in zero G or something like that, only to find out he's at the front line of a secret war against an alien species that attacks telepathically using their own nightmares as weapons. And I'd be amiss too, I think, not to mention The Neverborn Thief, which was put out by Crystal Lake July 22nd. And it's a re-release of what was originally a middle grade title. However, the original press that supported that publication shut down for kind of complicated reasons. But I was actually incredibly grateful to Crystal Lake, or I should say Crystal Cove, their YA imprint, for being amazing enough to take on the book to help me revise it and re-edit it for an older audience. It is now a full YA title instead of MG, which it is an extremely dark book, bordering. It's fantasy, but it does border on horror. So up in that audience bracket, I think was something I think was I'm really happy with as a decision, and I love the final version of the book. And hopefully some folk are willing to check that one out too.
Excellent. And I can vouch, I have read both of those books. They are excellent. They're fantastic. And everyone should pick them up along with Bad Side of Town. Awesome. Thanks again, Andrew. It was great having you in the boardroom.
And that's a wrap on our conversation with Andrew Najberg. If you'd like to learn more about The Bad Side of Town and its upcoming Kickstarter, you can head to www.beyondkiller.com. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time in the boardroom.